It always started the same way. Every evening in the kitchen, the same routine played out: peeling carrots, slicing onions, chopping tomatoes. The cutting board would fill with scraps, skins, stems, and pieces too small to use. The sink would hold cloudy water from rinsed rice, and on the counter, a small pile of used coffee grounds would gather, dark and fragrant, waiting to be thrown away. And like always, everything went straight into the trash. Out of sight, out of mind. But one evening, as I tied the garbage bag and lifted it toward the door, something stopped me. The weight of it felt heavier than usual. I looked inside and realized that most of what filled the bag wasn't really trash at all. It was food. Not the kind you'd eat on a plate, but the kind the earth could swallow, digest, and transform. For the first time, I thought to myself, what if this bag wasn't garbage? What if it was life waiting to happen? That thought refused to leave me. The next day, I stood in the kitchen again, cooking as usual. Potato peels curled onto the cutting board like ribbons. Onion skins crinkled as I tossed them aside. Rice boiled on the stove, releasing its soft, starchy scent. When I drained it, the water ran cloudy into the sink. Normally, I would have watched it swirl down the drain without a second thought. But this time, I paused. Could this milky water, simple rice water, actually feed my garden? I poured it into a jar instead of the sink. Later that evening, I carried it outside and poured it gently at the base of my struggling tomato plants. The soil drank it quickly, as though thirsty for something more than plain water. I didn't expect a miracle overnight, but I felt a spark of curiosity. The same happened with the coffee grounds. Instead of throwing them into the bin, I scattered them around the roots of my herbs. The smell of coffee mingled with the scent of basil and rosemary. It felt strange at first, like I was feeding my plants breakfast. But something inside me said it was right, that this was what the soil had been waiting for. And then there were the vegetable scraps. At first, I wasn't sure what to do with them. But after a little searching and experimenting, I discovered that they could be buried directly into the soil, where worms and microbes would break them down. So, I dug a small hole at the corner of my garden bed, dropped in the carrot tops, onion skins, and tomato stems, then covered them with earth. It felt almost like planting a secret. The days passed, and slowly, I noticed something changing. The soil that had once looked dry and tired began to look darker, richer, almost as if it was breathing again. The herbs grew greener, the tomatoes perked up, and even the flowers nearby seemed to smile a little wider. I realized then that I had stumbled upon something powerful, something almost magical. I had turned my kitchen waste into a garden feast. And it wasn't complicated. It didn't require expensive compost bins or fancy fertilizers. It was simply a shift in perspective, seeing waste not as an ending, but as a beginning. Every peel, every grain of rice, every spoonful of coffee was not trash, but a gift to the earth. A cycle had begun, and for the first time, my kitchen and my garden were speaking the same language. That was the beginning of my transformation, and my garden's transformation. Once I had begun, it became impossible to stop. Every time I cooked, I looked at my ingredients differently. The kitchen was no longer just a place where meals began and ended, it was the starting point of an endless cycle. My knife didn't just chop vegetables, it created the building blocks for tomorrow's soil. The potato skins that once felt useless became tiny golden treasures for the earth. Onion peels, so papery and fragile, turned into armor for the soil, slowly breaking down and leaving behind minerals. The cloudy rice water that once disappeared down the drain now became liquid energy. Even the smell of used coffee grounds, which I once associated only with the end of a long day, became the scent of new beginnings in my garden. At first, I treated it like an experiment. I didn't expect too much. I kept telling myself, it's just scraps, just leftovers. But the garden had a way of answering me in ways I couldn't ignore. The basil leaves that had been drooping stood taller, as though lifted by some invisible hand. The rosemary smelled sharper, richer. My tomato plants, which had been producing small, pale fruits, began to swell with color and flavor. And in the soil, life returned. Earthworms wriggled up to the surface whenever I watered, leaving behind their trails, proof that the underground world was thriving again. I realized that what I was doing wasn't just about avoiding waste, it was about awakening a hidden ecosystem. Every peel, every spoonful of coffee, every drop of rice water was not only food for plants but food for the countless unseen workers beneath the soil. The worms, the microbes, the fungi, all of them joined in a silent orchestra, turning my kitchen scraps into the richest compost I could have imagined. The transformation wasn't only in the garden. It was in me. I felt connected to something larger, something timeless. For the first time, I understood what people meant when they talked about closing the loop. Nothing was wasted. Everything had a purpose. The carrot I ate today gave its peel to the soil, which fed the earth, which grew the next carrot. I wasn't just feeding myself anymore, I was feeding the cycle of life. And strangely, this made me more creative in the kitchen too. I started saving not only the big scraps but also the tiny ones, garlic skins, tea leaves, eggshells. Every little piece had value. Some days I would blend vegetable scraps with a little water to make a kind of slurry and pour it directly into the soil. Other days, I would let the scraps rest in a jar of water for a few hours, creating a kind of nutrient tea for the plants. The results were always the same: greener leaves, stronger stems, healthier harvests. One evening, I harvested lettuce from the garden and tossed it into a salad. As I ate, I realized that every bite was flavored not only by the sun and rain but also by yesterday's kitchen scraps. It was a taste of connection, of harmony. Food didn't just come from the garden, it circled back to it. Neighbors began to notice. "Your tomatoes look incredible," one said. "What fertilizer are you using?" I smiled and told them, "Coffee, rice water, and vegetable peels." They laughed at first, thinking it was a joke. But when they tasted the tomatoes themselves, their smiles faded into surprise. They could taste the difference. It wasn't just about size or color, it was about flavor, depth, life. Word spread, and soon others were asking me how to do it. I shared what I had learned: save your scraps, bury them, pour rice water, scatter coffee grounds. Nothing complicated. Nothing expensive. Just a little consistency, and a willingness to see value where others saw waste. The most powerful change, though, was in my mindset. I no longer felt guilty when I saw food scraps pile up, because I knew where they were going. Instead of tossing them into a black bag destined for the landfill, I was giving them back to the earth. I was closing the circle. And every time I watched the soil darken and the plants thrive, I felt gratitude, for the food, for the earth, for the chance to be part of something bigger than myself. My garden had stopped being just a garden. It had become a story of transformation, one that started with something as simple as a bag of kitchen scraps. As weeks turned into months, the transformation became undeniable. My garden was no longer the same tired patch of soil I had struggled with before. It was alive, bursting with colors, buzzing with energy, glowing with a vitality I had never witnessed. All because I had stopped throwing away what was never really waste. The compost hole I had dug weeks earlier was now rich, dark earth. When I pressed my hand into it, it felt warm and soft, almost like it was breathing. I could see tiny threads of fungi spreading like veins through the soil, proof that life was weaving itself together beneath the surface. The carrot peels and onion skins had disappeared, transformed into nutrients I could not see but that the plants clearly felt. And the plants responded with abundance. My tomato vines bent under the weight of ripe, red fruit. My lettuce grew wide and crisp, leaves unfolding like green fans. Even the flowers, which I had barely paid attention to before, erupted in brilliant colors, attracting bees and butterflies that added another layer of life to the cycle. But what struck me most was not just the visible growth, it was the invisible connection. I began to notice how everything was linked. The rice water I poured at the base of my plants was not just feeding them directly, it was feeding the soil microbes, which in turn fed the roots, which in turn grew the vegetables I ate. The coffee grounds I sprinkled didn't just vanish into the dirt, they became fuel for worms, which aerated the soil and left behind castings that enriched it even more. Every step, every scrap, every act of returning gave birth to a chain of renewal. And I realized, this was not just gardening. This was a kind of quiet revolution. In a world where waste piles up in landfills, where soil erodes under chemicals, where food travels thousands of miles only to be thrown away uneaten, I had found a way to break free. In my own small garden, I had discovered a system that needed no factories, no plastic bags, no expensive solutions. Just the simple act of giving back what was already meant for the earth. This discovery changed more than my soil, it changed me. I no longer looked at my kitchen scraps as trash. I saw them as promises, as seeds of future harvests. Each peel I saved, each jar of rice water I poured, each spoonful of coffee I sprinkled was an act of faith in nature's ability to renew itself. And the garden never failed to answer. The meals I cooked with my harvest tasted different now. A simple salad carried the flavor of transformation. A stew made with garden vegetables felt like a celebration, not just of food but of the cycle that had brought it to my plate. Every bite was layered with gratitude, gratitude for the soil, for the scraps, for the lesson that nothing truly goes to waste if you choose to see its value. One afternoon, I invited my neighbors to share a meal from the garden. As we sat around the table, tasting tomatoes, herbs, and greens, I told them the story. How it all began with a bag of trash I almost threw away. How I decided to experiment with rice water and coffee grounds. How my scraps had turned into soil, and soil into abundance. They listened quietly, then looked at their own plates differently. One of them said, "It's like eating the story of your garden." And I realized they were right. The food was not just food anymore, it was a story of renewal, of life reborn from what others had discarded. And maybe that's the greatest lesson of all. That the cycle of life is not broken, even if we sometimes forget it. That in every home, in every kitchen, lies the power to heal the soil, to grow abundance, to create beauty. All it takes is a shift in perspective, to see waste as life waiting to happen. So now, when I stand in my kitchen and peel an onion, or rinse rice, or brew my morning coffee, I don't see garbage. I see tomorrow's garden. I see flowers blooming, tomatoes ripening, soil darkening with life. I see a cycle that begins in my hands and continues beneath the ground. And every time I walk into the garden, surrounded by the scent of herbs and the glow of green leaves, I know one thing for certain: the real magic isn't in the chemicals sold in stores. It's in the quiet scraps of everyday life. It's in what we choose to give back. So the next time you cook, pause before throwing anything away. Look at your peels, your water, your coffee. Imagine what they could become. Because your kitchen isn't just a place where meals are made. It is the beginning of a garden. And if you choose to give back, if you choose to feed the soil with what you once called waste, you'll see what I saw. A garden that doesn't just grow food, it grows life, hope, and renewal. That's the real update. Not just cooking. Not just gardening. But a cycle, alive again.